Oh boy, it finally happened. With the Techrot Encore update, all of the pseudo exalted weapons were reworked to be fully moddable, and you can even equip arcanes on them. Bladestorm is now possibly in the best place it has ever been, if you know how to mod for it. Annoyingly, this new change meant that one of my older videos is now completely obsolete, but at least we now have a system that's more straightforward. For the most part. Besides Bladestorm being changed, Ash got some other changes as well. His shuriken now deals more damage and throws 5 instead of 3 blades, and his fatal teleport augment got changed to be called Teleport Rush, which will extend the duration of your smokescreen upon making a kill with it, or when you perform a mercy kill, will fully reset your smokescreen timer. Additionally, you can also get some parkour velocity, which is capped at 30% for a certain duration. All of these durations will scale with ability duration modding. And then for the Bladestorm ability, Ash will now have a separate, fully moddable weapon called Shadow Clones. This weapon has a 5% crit chance with a 1.2 times crit damage multiplier and a 5% status chance with 1500 base finisher damage. Besides this, there were some quality of life changes that made targeting and marking enemies with Bladestorm a bit easier, which is nice to see. However, these rather disappointing stats would have you think that Bladestorm is not that good. But as you just saw, I was dealing negative damage cap. So let's dive in and let me explain exactly how I got there and how the new Bladestorm ability will function. The full Bladestorm damage formula will be as follows. First, you will get the initial finisher damage, which gets multiplied by your ability strength. Then, you get finisher damage as a separate multiplier, base damage as a separate multiplier, elemental damage modding as a separate multiplier, and faction damage as a separate multiplier. This whole riddle of stuff will also often be referred to as the total modded weapon damage. You can then further buff this with other multipliers, like having the correct elemental damage type against the faction you are facing. You can get an extra multiplier from your viral status procs on enemies, and because Bladestorm actually counts as ability damage, you can also get extra damage from ability damage. But for now, let's forget about them and add them back later. Of course, this modded weapon damage can also be further scaled with critical hits. So you will have your average damage multiplier, which is 1 plus the total crit chance, times your total crit multiplier minus 1, which then makes our average damage total look something like the following, where you have your average total damage, which is the total modded damage, times the average damage multiplier. If we then slot this all back in, we can get the full damage formula, which looks like the following. Now, before I show you how I use this to optimize the build, let's discuss some of the things that work or will not work for Bladestorm currently. Things that, for instance, do work are Arcane Fury on your Warframe to increase the damage. Combo duration increases will also function, so you can use things like the Dexterity Arcanes on your primary and secondary, and these will also be triggered by Bladestorm kills. Attack speed will increase the speed of the Bladestorm animation, which also means that Arcane Strike can be used, for instance. Wrathful Advance will add absolute crit chance now onto Bladestorm, making Bladestorm easily deal crits, even with its 5% crit chance. And Arcane Trickery also still works if you like that as a way of getting your invisibility. Relentless Combination will now also finally function correctly, increasing your ability combo multiplier on slash procs made by Bladestorm. Ability damage shards, like I said before, for instance Emerald shards that give you extra ability damage when you attack enemies with corrosive stacks on them, or Topaz shards, when you have the same effect but for radiation stacks on enemies, will increase your Bladestorm damage. And finally, Condition Overload now also works. Some things that don't work is, for instance, Combat Discipline, and this only doesn't work if the enemy dies from the upfront damage of your Bladestorm ability. However, it will still proc if the enemy dies from the slash proc effect. Initial combo from mods, or for instance from Arcane Crescendo, will not work as Bladestorm is not an actual weapon that you can hold. This also means that Tandem Bond for companions won't increase your combo multiplier. Going back to Arcane Crescendo, it is a little bit weird though, because if you apply it to your normal melee weapon, Bladestorm kills will charge that initial combo. Just using Arcane Crescendo on the Bladestorm ability itself will not work as you expect, and will also not increase your melee combo multiplier. Another mod that doesn't work, even though you would expect it to maybe do, is Summoner's Wrath, because the Shadow Clones do not actually count as a summon, which is a bit odd, because it would also mean that Combat Discipline would actually work, but it doesn't, so yeah, it's weird. Anyway, that's pretty much all I've been able to find so far. If I missed anything, please let me know down in the comments, and I'll add it to my own pinned comment, which will have the most up-to-date information. Now for the builds, there's 2 builds I made. One is for the funny damage cap numbers, which you saw in the beginning of the video, with upfront damage, and the other one is more focused on level cap missions, using slash damage over time that bypasses enemy armor. I do have to note that both of these builds will function completely fine in level cap, however the first build with the upfront damage is a little bit more action intensive, and the second one is more chill. For the damage cap build, I used an Ashe with 3 Tauforge shards for ability strength and 2 Tauforge shards for extra ability damage. Then for the mods, I went with a ton of ability strength, a good bit of duration, and I offset the range loss from narrow-minded with stretch. I also used Seeking Shuriken to strip enemy armor for maximum damage output. Then I subsumed Wrathful Advance from Kullervo onto his teleport ability, as I needed to keep Shuriken for Seeking Shuriken. However, if you don't like armor stripping with this ability, feel free to put Wrathful Advance here instead. For the arcanes, I used Arcane Crepuscular as it gives an increase to the crit damage multiplier, which is additive to the base, so instead of a 1.2 times crit multiplier, we now have 4.2. And it also gives a little bit of extra ability strength when you are invisible, which Ashe should be all of the time. And then I also used Mold Augmented for even more ability strength. Then for the weapons, I used the Pseudo Prime for priming enemies with a build focused on applying as many different status effects as possible, and I also built it for a little bit of status duration. Then I included primary dexterity here for a longer combo timer. Alternatively, you could also consider using the Bobonico here, which can apply less status effects, but feels less clunky to use as well. For the secondary, I was using the Grimoire for additional ability strength with the Vo mod, and I also used the other dexterity arcane here for even more combo time. For the melee, I chose the Praedos for the additional movement speed and parkour velocity that you can get from its Incarnon perks. Then for the focus school, you can either consider using Naramon or Madurai. If you go with Naramon, your combo multiplier will only diminish and not fully reset, which means that you do not necessarily need the dexterity arcanes anymore. However, Naramon will be worse in missions where you are going for level cap and also need to kill Thrax units. In this scenario, I would still recommend using Madurai. For the Shadow Clone build, I used both of the finisher damage mods. I modded for Viral against Orokin, and I used a faction damage mod. The remainder is some additional attack speed from Berserker Fury, and the base damage increases from Condition Overload and Prime Pressure Point. If you don't like running faction damage mods, you can take this off, and in that case, for a more general build, I would recommend that you change the elemental type to Toxin, as this has a ×1 or ×1.5 multiplier against all factions. To make this more general build, I would suggest you take off Vicious Frost for a Magnetic Rush and replace the faction damage mod with Spoiled Strike. For the companion, this build and the next build will both run a Panzerville Pfeila, which is made for viral spreading, and it can also help you generate energy by using the Synth Deconstruct mod on the companion and Equilibrium on your Warframe. For the second build, more focused on higher level content and bypassing armor, I am using a build that focuses on the slash procs. For this build, I will begin with the Shadow Clones build that I made. Do note that before, Bladestorm used to deal true damage, which also bypassed shields, which is why I'm running Fever Strike to deal toxic elemental damage that bypasses the shields. In terms of the weapons, only the melee weapon in this build will change, since I'm now also utilizing finishers. So I chose to go with the Magistar Incarnon, built for finisher damage. And then for the Ashe build, we are now running Roar instead of Seeking Shuriken, since we will not need that armor strip anymore because the slash procs will bypass armor. And on the Arcane slot, we are now running Arcane Fury instead of Arcane Crepuscular, as we don't deal crit damage. As I said, I'm now also utilizing finishers, and I use the new Rush Teleport augment. However, this mod is in a flex slot, so if you need anything else or want to use another augment, put that mod there. Also, the ability damage shards from before will have no effect on the slash procs that you get, so instead you will now go for a full 5 Tauforge shards for ability strength. And that pretty much covers Ashe and his reworked Bladestorm, which I think now feels a lot more straightforward to use compared to before. Let me know what you think about the entire Exalted rework down in the comments below, while I continue to work on more videos going over each of the Exalted weapon changes. Hope to see you then. Bye. As always, thanks to all channel members for supporting the channel. If you are looking to become a member, please find the join button below the video.